Alright, so time for Charlie X. This is one of those episodes that's particularly memorable because they actually came up with a very creative idea for the episode's antagonist, which is interesting because of the fact that this is actually one of the things that was genuinely Gene Roddenberry's idea. He didn't write a teleplay. He just wrote the um, big picture plot synopsis. And as it turns out, several parts of his original idea got changed. But the big picture concept of this actually is the same thing that Gene Roddenberry originally came up with. So, what is it? Well, the Enterprise has to find a ship that needs assistance. Yeah, the USS Antares, or just Antares as it's sometimes referred to, is a cargo vessel, more or less, that's being used by Starfleet to do things that aren't combat related. So, what this means is that it's not a well-armed ship or anything like that. It's more of a cargo vessel. The explanation of what the Antares' job is gets phrased several different ways that they're semi-conflicting. Like, it's referred to as a science vessel, but it doesn't really do science in the way that a lot of people think it does. And when it says that it's science stuff, what it seems to really be doing is geological studies, not scanning nebula or stuff like that. So the crew of the Antares. These are various humans who, Charlie takes control of their ship and forces them to do his will. This is apparently not something that he just knows how to do immediately because he's never actually interacted with humans before. Yeah, so like he takes several days getting to know them and figuring out how to use his powers to force them to do what he wants. And honestly, they're pretty normal Starfleet officers who all end up dead when the Antares explodes because Charlie decided he didn't want them anymore and that he was going to just get rid of them. Now, this is actually an interesting thing because the fact that it kind of sort of raises questions about Charlie because of the fact that him just killing everyone is, Charlie tries to say that the ship would have exploded anyways and that he just kind of sort of made it explode a little faster. But the thing is, we have no evidence that he's telling the truth. And we know that Charlie has in fact lied about quite a few other things. Anyways, so yeah, let's look at Charlie. This is the single most important character in the episode. Charles Evans, aka Charlie. Human with unnatural powers and doesn't actually have a properly developed moral compass. It basically it's like a child that has no concept of morality and is just doing anything and everything that strikes his fancy just because he can. Needless to say, that is a severe problem when someone with this level of power. And like I mentioned before, is that he apparently does not have qualms killing people just because he doesn't feel like playing with them anymore. Yeah. His powers are actually rather they're poorly defined, honestly. That's actually one of the things that's interesting is that he can apparently read people's minds and do telepathic stuff. He usually doesn't. Telekinesis. This is actually one of those things where it's like he has some very, very broadly defined psionic abilities. Like, it's like molecular reorganization where he just decides he wants something to change. Anyway, so let's go look at more specific things. Here we have the character of Tina Lawton, who, is a relatively young member of the crew of the Enterprise. Which, okay. Now, part of the thing with this, though, is that they were hoping that having Tina Lawton as a companion would make Charlie, somewhat more sociable. Except that before they had come up with this idea, Charlie had already decided that he only wants Jenny Rand, and that Tina Lawton, he just doesn't care. Yeah. His infatuation with Rand makes him go like completely over the deep end, and he actually turns Tina Lawson into an iguana. Solely because of the fact that he doesn't want her to talk to him again or something. I forget the exact reason for it. Anyway, though, let's look at the others. We have this guy who was a martial arts instructor / whatever on the ship. The interesting thing with this one is that Sam is genuinely trying to be a nice guy and help Charlie out, and Charlie gets PO'd that he isn't able to immediately do everything Sam can do as well as Sam can do it. So he just makes him disappear. Again, the Thassians, when they show up later, are able to bring him back. Unlike the crew of the Antares, because the Antares exploding was different somehow. I think what the difference there was actually just that, it wasn't him making them go away. It was the ship actually exploded. So if the Enterprise had, actually exploded, maybe none of them would have been able to come back either. Scary thought. Kind of a fail condition for a story involving this plot, Anyways. Oh, also, here's an interesting thing. It's like the one time Gene Roddenberry actually did a cameo in TOS. He provided the voice for the cook, even though he did. The actual actor is just an extra. Okay, so who or what was Colony Alpha 5? Now, the thing with Colony Alpha 5 is that we don't see it in the episode. It's mentioned as a place that some people that are relatively close relatives of Charlie Evans live, and that they're his closest known relatives, and that's literally the only thing we know about it. There is some suggestion that it's part of a group of colonies due to having a similar name to certain other colonies, but we literally don't know anything else about it. Anyways, so now for the, I guess you could call it notable guest. Thasus is actually a very interesting idea. Thasus is a world that was populated by humanoids who underwent some sort of like psionic transformation where they went from being humanoids to being these godlike beings with immense psionic powers and bodies which are not made out of flesh and blood, but are in fact just, weird globs of psionic energy, and are in fact considered a non-corporeal species. Thing is that the initial probes of Thasus are like, oh, this is a dead world. Nothing to see here. It's not really clear if that's true. Yeah, the ship that Charlie was on with his family that crashed on Thasus, Charlie was the only survivor, but he was also a small child. And the Thassians decided to, help him survive on their planet by giving him those powers. Well, one, the powers actually aren't apparently as strong as those of the Thassians, and two, this logic is bizarre because of the fact that the Thassians are apparently a reclusive race who don't really want to interact with the rest of the universe. Anyway, though, here we have the Thassian ship. It's a rather interesting thing because of the fact that the Thassians themselves are not made out of solid matter. They are instead made out of energy. So they don't use a ship that's solid matter. They use a ship that's seemingly just some sort of psionic construct, but it's a psionic construct that allows them to travel through space somewhat more easily. No, they don't bother explaining how that works. Why would they? We're never seeing this again. Maybe. The fact that the script actually describes the ship as ectoplasmic, yeah, says a lot. Also, these pictures are drastically different, but quite frankly, it kind of sort of looks like the same technology, just, one of them is a single blob, the other one is a more complex structure. Now, the interesting thing about this, though, is that it tells us that the Thassians could go to Earth if they wanted to. They don't. No, that's not very well explained. But it is seemingly the case. Why the Thassians choose to stay on their homeworld and avoid the rest of the universe, we don't know. There is actually the idea that's come up in some of these cases where they kind of sort of can't. Like, like being a psionic being means that you slowly disintegrate if you leave the source of your power or something like that. Not ever mentioned in regard to the Thassians, but it has come up with certain other races, like the FGC-47 life forms need to eat energy, and if they don't have a suitable source of energy to eat, they'll just die of starvation. It's not clear exactly how fast this process goes, but it's like having one of them get left in a place where there's no energy to eat. That would suck for them. Anyways, so the Thassian representative. This is actually what possibly the single most interesting part of the episode because of the fact that this is where we get to like the real talk explanation of what's actually going on. Like, again, Charlie is an unreliable narrator. But this guy doesn't actually tell us a huge amount of things. He has a few things to say, and they're all important things to say, but does kind of leave us with several important questions, such as, like, why didn't they just send him back to Earth? They chose to leave him on Thasus when they could have taken him back to Earth instead of leaving him on Thasus. Which, admittedly, the guy actually says that, yeah, okay, that was a bad idea. Well, we shouldn't have done that. Now, this gets into a second thing, though. See, the second thing is that I mentioned earlier that there was a different version of the plot that Gene Roddenberry originally wrote that was not the same thing that we got in the end. Well, part of it was that Gene Roddenberry's initial idea had a race called the Ferndock instead of the Thassians. Admittedly, the usage of the Ferndock race is not much different. However, it has one key difference. This being the fact that Charlie's mother was a Ferndock. Also, it's notable in this picture that this guy looks like an elderly human. There is literally nothing about this that looks different from a human. Which is apparently something that came from the original idea, is that Charlie being half Ferndock doesn't display any unusual traits because of the fact that Ferndocks just look like humans, apparently. And also, in that version of the story, it's Charlie's mother that comes to pick him up. And also, in that version of the story, Charlie, in a form of protest and deciding he doesn't want to go home, actually makes himself disappear. Yeah. When his mother comes to take him home, he refuses to go home and just makes himself poof. That's an interesting thing that you would have as an option if you're using this sort of thing in a story, because of the fact that it was, like I said before, is that Charlie being this kind of like insane person, he's doing amoral things for amoral reasons, and he just doesn't really want to do the right thing. He just does whatever he feels like doing. And, that in the original would have actually made him somewhat more malevolent, because of the fact that in the version as aired, he's just kind of like, he's more childlike, but in the original version, he actually knows his parents. He didn't grow up on his own with nothing but a broken Starfleet computer as a source of entertainment. Yeah. That does change a lot. Anyway, though. So yeah, Charlie X, one of the first super alien episodes, and definitely not the last. Those kind of became a tradition in Star Trek. Anyways, see you guys later.